Dwayne told you just Google Jim Gerrish and you'll find all kinds of stuff. Unfortunately, that's true. Now, I have a couple of cousins. If you don't put the grazing, if you're going to Google it, do Jim Gerrish grazing, because otherwise you'll get the one in New Jersey who's a science fiction writer. You'll get the one from Arkansas who's a radical Christian evangelist who wants to take the Holy Land back. And then there is also the cancer researcher from University of Arizona. So I'm the grazing one. You can go see those other guys' websites and learn far more about topics you may not be that interested in. But, okay, so the order of today, I'm going to start out talking about what really matters in grazing management. Over the last 35 years, I spent 23 of those years working in Missouri at the university. Yeah, I'll try to say Missouri rather than Missouri, so you know what I'm talking about. But it's 23 years in Missouri working for the university there at a research station, similar type of thing to what goes on here. Through most of that time, 22 plus years of it, we also had our own personal farm there. We did cow-calf, sheep, custom grazed, we did beef stockers, replacement heifers, cow-calf pairs, dry cows, and even horses. 11 years ago, a little over 11 years ago, we moved to Idaho. And I always tell people, if my life's ambition was to be in the cow business, I never would have left Missouri. Idaho's a little tougher place to be in the cow business. I went there recreational lifestyle move. I did not go there with the expectation of ever, running a ranch, being day-to-day, hands-on, doing that again. But I fell into a deal I couldn't pass up, so for the last almost 11 years now, we've run an irrigated pasture unit that's a component of a larger ranch. Overall, the ranch, it's about 1,000 cow outfit. On our irrigated pastures, we run about 40% of the ranch herd for about 7 to 8 months of the year. The other 60% of the herd goes out on 160,000 acres of public land grazing for several months. But our 450 acres of irrigated land matches the productivity of over 100,000 acres of the public land. So I've worked in a high natural rainfall environment back in Missouri. We got 38 to 40 inches of rain a year. I work in an 8-inch desert rangeland environment, and then also have the magic of irrigation. And that gives you a different perspective. You would say, wow, those are all totally different things. You know what? Really, they're not. The basic principles, the basic plant, animal, soil interaction is the same. Things just happen really fast under irrigation, and they happen really slowly out on the desert range. But the basic relationships are the same. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is 5 basic principles of what really matters in grazing management. We're going to start out talking about carrying capacity. And I used to have stocking rate up there on that line rather than carrying capacity. But it's far more important that we actually understand carrying capacity. Our goal really is to match stocking rate to the carrying capacity of the land. So we're going to talk about carrying capacity. But here's the classic definition of stocking rate. It's the number of animals or animal live weight. And I always prefer to think in terms of animal live weight rather than number of animals. Because if I said, I put 500 cows out on that pivot, what does that tell you? You don't know if I have 1,000-pound cows or 1,700-pound cows. So when I talk about stocking rate, it's going to be in pounds of animal live weight. Then we can do stockers, sheep, cattle, whatever we want to. But it's the number of animals or animal live weight assigned to a grazing unit on a seasonal basis. To illustrate it, if we have 10 head on 10 acres, our stocking rate is 1 head to the acre, correct? And then if those cows weighed 1,200 pounds, and I know up here in Canada you would consider those dwarves, but good, real functional cows at 1,200 pounds, our stocking rate, we could express it as 1,200 pounds to the acre. Then we would have the idea, well, I could probably put 2 600-pound stockers out there, or I could put 850-pound ewes, if the piece of information that we had was the animal live weight per acre. Stocking rate is what we choose to put out there. It might be too many animals, it might be too few, and it might be just right. Whoop, hit that one too fast. Let me back up one. All right. You've probably never seen anything that looked like this on your own place. From time to time, you can look across the fence on the neighbors, and you might see a pasture that looks like this. And I think we can all agree that the basic problem on that pasture today is there's just too many animals. It is stocked at a level that's beyond the ability of that resource to bear. And those cattle are going to be out there for a little while longer. This is 5 miles down the road from where I live right now. I think we could probably agree that at least at this moment, this pasture is stocked at an appropriate level for the resource base. Those two pictures are 5 miles apart. Same climate, same soil, both are sprinkler irrigated pastures, but they're totally different. And I probably didn't, but I could have taken those two photographs on the same day. It isn't that one's at the peak of the growing season and that one is, at the very tail end of it. Once we get past the first month of the season, that contrast exists between those two pastures. So that says that carrying capacity is the product of not only the environment but also management. So the definition we use for carrying capacity, the stocking rate that provides a target level of performance while maintaining the integrity of the resource base. All right, that target level of performance. Some people would think when you're in the cattle business or ranching and you say target level of performance, some people want to think about weaning weights. Oh, weaning weights or breeding percentages. You know how I think target level of performance? My net income per acre. Depending on the environment I'm going to set that number somewhere between $20 an acre and $1,000 an acre. That's the target level of performance that I'm interested in. Whether a calf weighs 400 pounds or 650 pounds, I don't really give two hoots in hell, because it has virtually nothing to do with profitability. So my bottom line is, what is that acre returning me? And then maintaining the integrity of the resource base, that means that I can go back there year after year after year with some adjustment for what the rainfall in that season is. But pretty consistently, I can go back and expect to get that level of performance year after year. That's what carrying capacity is. And as I indicated, it's the product of both the environment you're in and the management imposed. Again, 5 miles apart. Let me see if I can find the pointer. If I stood on this side of those cattle, I would be looking at that mountain right there. That's how close together they are. Clearly, there's a difference in management here. And we'll come back and see these guys a little bit later. If you didn't know this, this is what you can take home as the thing you learned here today. Water makes grass grow. It ain't rocket science. All right, this is a standard table for forage production based on the precipitation regime. If you get less than 10 inches of rainfall a year, production's pretty sparse. And it can be inconsistent. It all depends on exactly when that 8 inches of precipitation that we get on our desert rangeland, everything depends on when did that precipitation happen. So we're increasing the amount of precipitation in the environment by 5-inch increments. And then this column here, this is the pounds of forage dry matter we expect to produce per acre based on each inch of water. So what is the average precipitation around here? How much? 18 inches. So we'd be in this 15 to 20 inch range. So for every inch of water, we should expect somewhere between 150 and 250 pounds of dry matter forage produced per inch of water received. That says the expected forage yield in perennial pastures is somewhere between roughly a ton to 2.5 tons to the acre. Is that a reasonable range for what happens here? Okay. So that's a standard table. As we put more and more water into the environment, up to a point, each inch of water gives us more of a response. Why is that? One of the things I will hit some other things, but a very important biological relationship that we need to understand. If you are concerned about building organic matter in your soil, if you are concerned about protecting the soil, developing life there, this is a very important concept. If we were in, say, that 30 to 35 inch precipitation regime, we watch a plant grow, and if it produces 4 tons of biomass above ground, it's going to produce about 4 tons below ground. When you're getting more than about 35 inches, the amount of above ground growth is going to be approximately equal to below ground growth. If we go all the way back to that driest area though, like our rangeland in Idaho, only 20% of the annual biomass growth of a grass is above ground. 80% is below ground. Why is that? Because in that high rainfall environment, that plant thinks, oh, it's going to rain later this week, I'll put out a new leaf. And it's no big deal to put out another leaf because it's probably going to rain sometime. They are geared towards growing and being productive in that season. You go to really dry environments and that plant doesn't know if it's going to rain again this year. And it might not next year. And so those plants are geared towards long-term survival. And long-term survival is based on developing a massive root system and a strong basal crown to that plant. And they're very conservative about how often they're going to put a leaf out. Because for them, a leaf is an expenditure of energy and water that they might not be able to recover. Here in this 18-inch environment, you're probably looking something at roughly a third of the plant's production is above ground, 2/3 is below ground. And that's one of the differences why we see water conversion to plant growth drop off so rapidly as it gets drier. There's some other factors that we'll hit here momentarily. Some important things. I asked what the average rainfall is. Did you know that average and normal aren't the same things? Normal weather pattern is 7 out of 10 years in a continental climate like this, 7 out of 10 years it's going to be below average. It only takes a couple high rainfall years. I bet sometime since you've been here, there's been a 35-inch rainfall year.
2010.
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd. It rains and you've never seen anything like that. Well, it doesn't take but 1 or 2 of those high rainfall years over a 10-year period to push the average up. So what we're really concerned with is normal precipitation, not average. You can look at the long-term weather records, and usually they give an average precipitation. You need to take 10 to 15% off of that to see what's actually normal for your area. So your normal precipitation is probably more like 15 inches if the official average is 18. So we have to, base our planning on normal, not average. Then we need to think about, of that precipitation that comes, how much of it do we actually get to use? What do we get into the soil? You mentioned 2010. In 2010, when you got all that rain, did it all soak into the ground? Or did the creeks flood and the rivers ran high all through the spring? Big rainfall events, the soil can't always infiltrate those, so we don't capture all of that water. Small rainfall events in the summer may not be very effective because of high temperatures and rapid evaporation. A 2/10 inch shower doesn't soak very far into the soil, and if it clears off right off after that, and if you have a lot of bare soil out there and the soil temperature heats up rapidly, the majority of that water is going to be gone. So we might think it's nice that we get 2/10 of an inch shower spaced over, 2 month period of time, or 2 week period of time, 2 months, whatever, depends on where you are. But the reality is 1 inch precipitation event very often will do you more good than 2 inches that are just a spit of rain here, spit of rain there, because of evaporation. Unless you have the soil covered. If you have the soil covered, those 2/10 inch events are very valuable. And you have something called winter up here, and you might get a lot of snow in the wintertime. Not all of that water converts into plant growth, because some of it vaporizes off of the top. If it melts too quickly in the spring, again, runoff and flooding, it doesn't get into the soil. So these are factors that determine what the effective precipitation is going to be. We're not going to go through this in particular, but I want to point out, when we're talking about increasing the carrying capacity of your ranch, there are basically only 3 management factors that actually make a difference. And what those 3 factors are is converting most of your annual precipitation into effective precipitation. So capturing more of the water that falls on your place, making sure it gets into the soil, and making sure that you have a soil that will hold water and then slowly release it back for plant growth. And that's largely built around maintaining vegetative ground cover, building the litter layer on the soil surface, and developing deep organic matter in your soil. The other one is increasing this expected dry matter yield per inch of precipitation. Some factors that come into play there are, what is the base fertility of your farm? Do you have adequate phosphorus, sulfur, zinc, boron in the soil, so that when it does rain, the plant community that you have there will grow? Do you have a plant community that's adapted to your environment, that is broad in species diversity, so you have roots going to different depths in the soil to capture that water? Those are the things that determine what that yield per inch of water is going to be, and then altering the seasonal utilization rate across your property. And that's basically 100% the product of improved grazing management. But those are the 3 areas that you can affect with your management and actually change carrying capacity. Most of these don't cost a great deal of money, especially if you plan ahead, understand what the relationships are, and build all the pieces together simultaneously and holistically. If you do that, they're not going to cost you a great deal of money. Sometimes at this point people say, oh, what about putting on nitrogen fertilizer? Yeah, nitrogen fertilizer will grow grass, but it comes at a big cost, both financially and ecologically in the soil. So, to me, it's what I would call a lose-lose situation. Not a big fan of that. Other things that are going to make a difference in how much you can produce, obviously the length of the growing season. Saskatchewan compared to Oklahoma. That's a 280-day growing season down there. What do you call your growing season here? 120, something like that? Yeah. So obviously you can grow more grass in 280 days than you can in 120. Soil type and condition, past management history, yada, yada, yada. Those are other things besides precipitation that matters. But the overriding factor is simply how much water do you get into the soil. So that's on the production side of it. These are the factors that really determine what your carrying capacity is going to be. We'll walk through them real quickly. Forage production. What are things we can do to increase forage production? Irrigate, fertilize, interseed legumes into our grasses, completely tear up the pasture and reseed it to some kind of wonder grass. Are we all in agreement that if you do these things, it will probably raise your carrying capacity? I hope so, because they will. What do all four of those have in common? Muchos dinero. Yeah, they all cost money. And with those four, it's a pretty well-defined expenditure, right? We write a check for the fertilizer. We write a check for the irrigation cost. We write a check for the seed that we planted. So we have a pretty good idea. We spent this many dollars, and this is what we got back. If you keep grazing records, you know what you got back. If you don't keep grazing records on an individual pasture basis, then you probably don't know what you got back, and you have no idea whether that was a worthwhile investment or not. Does anybody in this room think that grazing management makes a difference? That simply making a change in grazing management can allow you to produce more grass? Does anybody believe that? Let's see actual show of hands. Okay, I'll say it's a majority opinion. That's absolutely true. It will make a difference, and we'll see how much difference here in a little bit. So, what does grazing management cost? Labor, someone says. Fencing, stock water development, taking time off from your work to come here, and I don't know if they're charging you anything for this or not. If they are, you've got an expenditure in your education to learn about grazing management. So grazing management is not free. It comes at a price, and it's a little harder to sometimes figure out exactly what that price tag is. But again, if you keep the records, you can determine what the response is. You keep good financial records, and you can also have a pretty good idea of what did it cost you to make that change in management. What did the infrastructure investment cost? Are you using more labor, or are you saving labor? You can figure it out. Residual and timing we're going to talk about a little bit later. Already mentioned the seasonal utilization rate. That's the percentage of the biomass that grows in your pasture in a year's time. What percentage of it do you actually get into the gut of your livestock? It's our harvest efficiency. The things that affect it. In high natural rainfall environments or irrigation, this is the number one factor. The length of the grazing period, and then the frequency at which we make harvest cycles. As we make the grazing period shorter, down to a day or fractions of a day, when we go from a 2-week grazing period to a 1-week to a 3-day to a daily, our seasonal utilization rate is steadily going to go up, because we're allowing the animals to waste less forage. We're harvesting it quickly, getting off, accelerating the rate of recovery, and so we can grow and harvest more forage doing that. When we go out on big rangeland units, grazing distribution across the landscape is the number one factor that determines what the utilization rate is going to be. And that is largely driven by location and availability of stock water, because cattle will only travel so far away from stock water and still graze efficiently on the landscape. And then these other factors come into play, but those are the big two. On rangeland, shortening the grazing period is going to allow you to increase seasonal utilization, but only to a small degree. A lot of these rangeland settings were only once or twice a year grazing. And so it isn't like we're going to be able to suddenly magically make it so we can graze them 3 times, because the plant simply can't grow enough biomass based on the availability of water to allow the 3rd grazing. But we can increase the grazing efficiency somewhat by, rather than turning them out there for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, bringing that down to 5 days a week, 2 weeks, something like that. Daily intake, this is what the animal needs to eat to meet our performance goals. And when we look at what really affects availability or intake, When we're dealing with warm season grasses, like the tall grass prairie, the blue stem Indian grass, little blue stem type pastures, from an animal's mechanics of grazing and digestion processes, it's about a 50-50 balance between the availability of that forage and the quality of that forage. When we go on to a cool season forage, though, like this smooth brome grass and alfalfa, or brome grass with alsite clover that I've seen driving over here, it's about 75% availability and only 25% quality. Protein deficiencies, which will hurt rumen function, occur much more in warm season grasses than they do in cool season grasses. You actually have to screw up pretty badly in grazing management on a cool season grass to make it protein deficient for a cow. For a growing yearling that you're trying to get a high rate of gain on, yeah, protein might be too low. But for a beef cow, it's hard to get a cool season grass protein deficient. It's very easy to get it grazed so short that they simply physically cannot eat enough in a day to meet their intake needs. Again, and then when we get out on big rangeland again, it's the availability, the quality of the forage, but also that animal's knowledge of that range unit to know where to go at any point in the season and find where the best feed on that unit is, and also to avoid toxic plants and things like that. So the foraging skill of the animal becomes increasingly important when we get into bigger rangeland settings. And then we have the length of the grazing season. And, you know, yeah, I'm north of the border now and it snows up here, and yeah, you guys deserve to feed a little hay or something, I suppose. Though I think there's people up here who feed little or no hay anymore. You know, I always say for cow, calf, or using lambs, think in terms of grazing 365 days of the year. Are you going to accomplish that? Are you going to do that every year? Probably not. But if you say, you know, hell, I can't graze past October here because my dad never did and my granddad never did, yeah, that's kind of a defeatist attitude, because the buffalo sure did. So think that way, shave off some here, shave off some there, get that down to a reasonable length of feeding if you have to do it. All right, coming back, important concept. Carrying capacity is not constant year-round. So why should stocking rate be? You have a lot more forage in the spring and the summer than you do in the winter from a growing standpoint. That should begin to dictate how many animals you have, what type of animals, when they're here. Missouri is kind of the Garden of Eden of grazing. That's why I said if my life's ambition was to be in the cow business, I never would have moved. But once you figure a few things out, year-round grazing was easy there. Did we have winter there? Yeah. We'd get, 1 foot, 2 foot snow events. Sometimes they'd stay for a week. Sometimes they'd stay for 2 or 3 months. We saw minus 20 every winter. Minus 20 F word, not C word. Yeah. Missouri, North Missouri is way more like Iowa than it is like Arkansas. And the big thing that I finally figured out was that my cow herd needed to be based on my winter grazing capacity, not my summer grazing capacity. And when we changed, that's what allowed us to eliminate making hay and feeding hay in our business, because we stocked, our cow herd number was based on our winter grazing capacity. And we actually gave up very little in terms of cow numbers. And then all the surplus growth in the spring that we used to make hay, we harvested that with our custom grazed animals. And that eliminated making it into hay, eliminated us having to feed hay. Because the custom grazed animals would leave our place around the 1st of August, and all the land that they used, that's what we grew for winter cow feed. It's not going to work the same way up here, but it's an important idea. If you have no winter grazing capacity, why are you in the cow business? And that's the big question. Okay, next one we have here is stock density, and we consider this to be the most powerful tool in the grazer's toolbox. Once you have your carrying capacity approximately right, then stock density is the tool that we use to manage almost all other aspects of the pasture. So we had defined what stocking rate was. It's the animal live weight assigned to a grazing unit on a seasonal basis. We had this example here of stocking rate. Now, when I was going to school in the 1970s, in no pasture or livestock class, in no textbook that I read, did I ever hear or see the term stock density. In the 1970s, it was completely absent from our vocabulary. And the reason why is all of the textbooks, all of the teachings in those days was based on set stocking or continuous grazing. Stocking rate and stock density are identical. They're just redundant terms when you're in set stocking. All right, there's my neighbor's pasture. I spy on my neighbors. I haven't got into a drone yet, but doing that. But I know from the satellite photographs how big their pastures are. I can count the animals out there. I watch when they begin feeding hay, when they're done feeding hay. I'm pretty sure that I know more about the productivity of their pastures than they do. This particular pasture, well, I should say in general, pivots that are grazed this way in our environment, 120 to 140 animal unit days per acre is what they're producing. There's our pasture, and our long-term, we're about 270 stock days per acre is our average. We have been over 300, in a good year. So this is more than twice what the neighbors are producing in the same environment. So that's what tells me that management can make more than a twofold difference in the productivity of the land. And that's pretty substantial. You realize that's just like having another ranch? It's like having another section of land given to you for free if you just change the management on the land base that you already have. It's pretty tremendous. So, stock density. The number of animals or animal live weight assigned to a specific pasture area at a point in time. That's what stock density is, and it's very important to understand that it's at a point in time, not for a duration or a period of time. It's at a point in time. That's how we get these big numbers, high stock density, where we can use the livestock actually as a powerful tool to change the plant community out there, to change the dynamics of the soil, to accelerate the nutrient cycle, a whole lot of things that we can do. So, as I said, set stocking, it's the same. It's only when you start splitting up the pastures and concentrating animals, the stock density come into play. So here, we've put our 10 head on 2.5 acres, so the stock density went from 1,200 pounds per acre to 4,800 pounds per acre. At this level of subdivision and rotation, about all you accomplish is maintaining a little more vigor in your pastures, perhaps the opportunity to keep some more diversity out there, some legumes in the pasture. You might be giving them enough recovery time. You're highly unlikely to actually see a significant animal change in carrying capacity or a change in individual animal performance here. Now we have all 10 head on a 1 acre, and we're at 12,000 pound stock density here. At this level of stock density and frequency of rotation, you can start to see substantial changes happening in pasture condition. We're starting to alter the nutrient cycle a little bit. You may or may not see any benefit to individual animal performance, but you will probably pick up some additional carrying capacity. If you do a really poor job on this kind of rotation, you're quite likely to actually see a decline in individual animal performance. Lower weaning weights, more open cows, not good things happening. That's not an output of the approach, it is missing the details of management, particularly grazing pastures too short, which we'll see later. Split it again, stock density goes up another ratchet, and just every time you split a pasture, concentrate animals, stock density is going up. And that increases the power of the tool that we have to work with. So just visibly to see it, this is about an 80-acre pasture with 40 heifers on it, and they're set stocked. And so the stock density there is about 400 pounds per acre. At any point in time, those 40 heifers could be grazing over here, they could be grazing over there, they could be grazing over here. So it's a low stock density situation. The cattle have all the choices that they could possibly want about where they go in the pasture, what they choose to eat, when they choose to eat it. Back behind them, that's 300,000 pound stock density there. And that's a fairly high stock density. These cattle are moved 3 or 4 times a day. But visibly, you can see there's a great deal of difference in the amount of animal impact that we're going to put on the land. And you might see, it's all dark back here behind them, this one in particular, and you might think, well, they've really trampled that up. Now, I was on the ground there. That's not trampled up. That is painted that color with cow poop. That's how concentrated the manure is getting on that field. And do you know what happens when you put that level of manure on a field? There's something in urine, it's called nitrogen. And besides water, once you understand that water makes grass grow, the next thing you learn is nitrogen makes grass grow. And the amount of nitrogen that's being left behind in a pasture like that causes that forage to boom, pop up, recover very quickly. That pasture was created because of low stock density grazing, giving the animals complete and total choice of where they're going to eat, when they're going to eat, what they're going to eat, and believe it or not, those are all business decisions. Cows are really not qualified to make business decisions. They're very good at being cows. I hate it when people say, oh, cows are the stupidest animals there are. Almost every cow knows everything she needs to know to be a good cow. She's not stupid. She just has never read Plato, okay? And on this business decision things, I don't know what the best business schools in Canada are, but we would talk about Harvard School of Business and Tufts. You can go through all the years, look at all the graduation records, and there's not been one cow that has ever graduated out of a business program at any of these schools. So don't let cows make the business decisions on your ranch, because frankly they don't care. But low stock density is what created that pasture. We created this using high stock density because we make the decisions about where, when, how much, and what the cows are going to eat. Those are important business decisions, so we make those for them. So what's the right stock density? Everybody know the answer to this one? It depends. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And guess what? We got kind of a formula for what goes into determining the appropriate stock density. Rather than being the total amount of forage produced in a year, it's forage availability. How much grass is in this pasture today? How much of it do you want to use? So we're looking at what we call temporal utilization rate rather than seasonal utilization rate. Intake goes in there. Are we grazing dry cows? Are we at peak lactation? Are we trying to finish some beef animals on pasture? Intake's going to change depending on what the particular class of livestock is and what we're trying to accomplish with them, and the length of the grazing period, how short do we want to get it. The examples that I'm going to show, I've just have 3 little tables coming up here. They're all going to be based on a one-day grazing, but it's going to show you how the intake target, the utilization target are going to change what the potential stock density is. So on this table here, we're looking at intake target of 2.5% of body weight a day. That's a moderate level of performance. That's a 1,000-pound cow eating 25 pounds of forage in a day. It's a 500-pound steer eating, 7.5? What's that, 500? 12.5 pounds of forage a day. What I want to look at now, if we have a pasture that has 2 tons of forage standing out in it, so you're just about ready to cut it for hay, but we're going to put the cattle in. We're going to ask those cattle to eat half of it, and they're going to consume about 2.5% of body weight. The appropriate stock density for those conditions would be about 80,000 pounds of live weight per acre. So if we had, again, 1,000-pound animals, we could fence 80 of them onto 1 acre for 1 day, and they should end up getting enough intake for that moderate level of performance, leave half of the grass behind, and go away happy. So that takes 2 tons of forage to do that. What if we can only grow 1,000 pounds out there? I mean, this is a drier place. You don't get all of these 2-ton crops sometimes. Sometimes it's just, 6, 7, 8 inches of grass. If you go out and harvest that, 20,000 pound stock density is the upper end. Now, if you've read any of the articles in the magazines, or you've gone to a field day at Neil Dennis, I said, how many people have been to Neil Dennis's farm in here? Just a handful. Okay. First I'll say, if you're in this location and for whatever reason you have been told, you believe in your heart of hearts that to accomplish what I need to do on my pastures, I have to be grazing at 100,000 pound stock density, how do you do it when you have that little bit of forage? How do you turn that 20,000 into 100,000? You move them 5 times a day. And if you want to go to 500,000 pounds, I guess you move them 25 times a day. Well, that sounds like a lot of work, doesn't it? Depends on how you do it. In big range country, a couple of cowboys who understand cattle behavior, they will move cattle 20, 25, 30 times a day. Isn't that what they're actually doing? Drifting those cattle across the range so that they take a bite off of this area, walk away from it, take a bite over here. That's what traditional herding of livestock is. It's very high stock density grazing. And if you have predators in the area, you want to keep that herd as concentrated as possible. If you're in a tame environment and you don't have cowboys like that, you do it with fence. Now, moving fence 25 times a day would be pretty arduous. I rarely do it more than once a day because personally I'm quite lazy. One of my sons runs a ranch in Texas. He was on a 3,500 acre, 1,300 cow outfit in the Missouri Ozarks, and he went all the way up to 10 times a day moves there, but he backed down to 6. Because he couldn't sustain the 10 moves a day, but he could do the 6 moves a day. And the 6 moves a day allowed them to accomplish a lot of things in vegetation management to change, weedy, brushy, rough land into very good productive pastures. So it depends on what your goals are and what your level of motivation are, but you can use stock density to accomplish a great number of things. We're going to change the criteria a little bit. And we're going to push the utilization rate all the way up to 80%. Now, during the growing season, I'm pretty well a take half, leave half guy. We'll take about half of the plant up, top growth off, leave half behind. In the wintertime, though, grazing stockpile dormant pastures, I'll push that up to 80%. Because I'm not going to, as long as I leave the appropriate amount of residual behind, I'm not going to hurt it by removing any more. Our 2-ton standing crop, now we can go up to 128,000 pounds, and on our 1,000, we're up to 32,000. So we could move them only 3 times a day rather than 5 times a day if we had a goal of grazing at 100,000 pounds. Now, if we're grazing dormant pasture in the wintertime, we're not looking for this level of performance at 2.5% of body weight. That's about a 1.6 pound average daily gain on a stocker, by the way. So I've dropped that to 2.2%, so just a little over maintenance. And you see the stock density, appropriate stock density on our first example was at 80,000 pounds per acre. Now we're at 145. We had been at 20,000 on this one. It's up to 36. So you can create higher levels of stock density with non-productive animals, dry cows, and you can push the utilization rate up with dry cows. So what this says to me, if I want to use stock density as a management tool to clean up a pasture, to change the nature of that pasture, I'd better be trying to do it with dry cows, not with growing stock. And I can accomplish a lot of those goals with winter grazing rather than growing season grazing. If I have specific weeds that they will only eat when they're green, then I'm going to target those weeds when they're at their weakest state with as high a stock density as I can to get those eaten off in the growing season. Then I'm going to have to give that land a more extended recovery period. So there isn't one magical number that you need to hit for stock density. It's about understanding the relationships between utilization rate, animal performance, how much has to be left behind for recovery. It's understanding those relationships and then matching the animal concentration, the stock density, to those particular situations. Next thing I want to talk about here is post-grazing residual. So that's the green material that we leave behind after grazing. Why does it matter? Because residual affects just about everything in the whole pasture ecosystem. We'll start with looking at growth rate. So here's a pasture ready to be grazed, high in phase 2. This pasture was about 14 inches tall, and I estimated there was about 3,500 pounds of dry matter per acre out there. Now this goes back to some work we did in Missouri, looking at the residual height in inches and then the daily growth rate of the pasture. And this is the growth rate required to go from the pasture having been grazed off at these different levels to grow 1 ton of forage back in the field. And this is what the pasture composition was, not exactly what you would have here. The residual heights are going to change some, the daily growth rates are going to change some, but whether we were talking about big blue stem, the tallgrass prairie that encompass southern Saskatchewan, whether we're talking about blue bunch wheatgrass on our desert rangeland, or irrigated pasture or natural rainfall pasture, this would actually be I've been on pastures that are almost exactly like this over in Manitoba. The basic relationship holds true for almost any grass plant that we want to talk about. Just the numbers are a little different. So what you can see with this particular pasture is anything, and like I said, average height of about 12, 14, 15 inches when you start. We can leave it anywhere between about 4 inches and 8 inches and get about the same rate of recovery. It's when we start taking a bite, each additional bite, where we end up taking it less than 4 inches, that's when we really see this fall off in recovery rate. So, if we leave it anywhere between 4 and 8 inches, the average, that growth rate line, that's at 50 pounds per acre per day. So it's going to take about 40 days to grow a ton of feed. That's what a phase 2 residual looks like. That's 4 to 5 inch average height. You see a lot of green leaf there. There's the opportunity, the animals have taken the bite. This is following a 24-hour, a one-day grazing event. The animals have left here. So there's a lot of leaf area left behind, capture solar energy. This pasture is going to regrow quickly. So some of your neighbors, probably from time to time, go to the pasture thinking they're going to move the cattle. They look at it and said, oh, there's still green grass there. I'm going to leave them there another day. That is the fear of wasting grass. And the fear of wasting grass has done more to degrade rangeland and pastures all across the world than anything else. If you or someone you love falls into this category, we do have a rehab program. It is a 12-step program. And if you've ever been in rehab, you may know that very often in our circle, we say things together to give us support and strength to move beyond what we once were. And this is the first step in the rehabilitation from being an overgrazer. We say, I will have no fear of wasting grass. And so if I could, if you want to move down the road to a new life, repeat with me, I will have no fear of wasting grass. I see some people in here who evidently are scared antless of making a change because they would not utter those simple words of, I will have no fear of wasting grass. Because you know what? We don't waste grass. If you approach the pasture from the standpoint that first, grass feeds grass, and then grass feeds the soil, and then grass feeds the livestock. When the drought comes, when it's a little bit tough, you will probably still have pasture. But if you approach the pasture from the standpoint of, gotta feed the cows, gotta feed the cows, gotta feed the cows, as soon as it gets a little bit dry, you're out of grass. Because you haven't fed the grass and you haven't fed the soil. So don't be afraid to waste grass, because really it's not. It's just building your future. Yeah. I took this picture almost 10 years ago. And when I was first doing this at sessions like this and using that picture, and I'd say, well, do you move them or do you leave them? A whole lot of people would say, oh, there's plenty of grass there, we'll leave them. More and more as I do sessions like this, because people are learning that there's no fear of waste, no such thing as wasting grass. Most people will say, yeah, move them, move them. The other thing I remember from 8-9 years ago when I used this picture, some guys would say, hell, that's more grass than I put my cows in on. And that's when I would say, aha, you've just answered your own question right there. That's why you don't have any grass. So here is the product of leaving them there another day, because we were afraid to waste grass. A lot less green leaf in there, isn't it? And the bite that the animal took to take it down to that level, because the grass doesn't tear off it as easy when you get that low in the canopy. The bite is lower quality, it is smaller, and the animal expended more energy to harvest that bite. You know what that does? It degrades the soil, it degrades the plant, and it lowers individual animal performance. You know what we call that? That's what we call a lose-lose-lose situation. And if we wanted to take it on out to the point of you have less beef to sell at the end of the year, and next year you can't run as many cattle because you've done this, then it becomes the lose-lose-lose-lose situation. So, if we take that other bite off, take it down to 2-inch residual rather than leaving it 4 or more, 64 days to grow a ton of feed in that environment. 200-day growing season, 200 days divided by 64 days to grow a ton, you go 3 tons per acre in a year. 200 days and the ability to grow a ton in 40 days, you grow 5 tons in a year. This relationship, as I said, it doesn't change. We can shorten that growing season to 120 days and make this be 90 days and this one be 63 or whatever. You know what? It's all going to come out the same. When you bite that grass severely, it costs you big time. So the decision to not leave the cows there, the decision to leave that extra 2 inches of residual, it's about a 2/3 increase in the productivity of the land. That's big. That is huge. And we could talk about if everybody in the world would just leave 2 more inches of grass. Maybe you've heard Alan Savory's TED Talk. Maybe you've seen some of these other news articles that are floating around that cows can stop climate change if they're managed differently. I totally and wholeheartedly believe that we can take the carbon out of the atmosphere that we've put there over the last 150 years, put it back into soil based simply on that. Let's leave 2 more inches of grass out there and we will change the world. And then there's just the we got the seam there, which distorts a little, but that's leaving them there the extra day. That's leaving a phase 2 residual behind, and it does make a difference. If you've been to very many grazing programs, you've seen either this very picture or one very similar to it. It's a classic. Now, the photo that I used, it says Alberta Riparian Habitat Management, the Cows and Fish Project. That's not the origin of this. This comes from a 1961 research publication, the trial at University of Illinois. And usually, if you're at a grazing meeting, the presenter will say, okay, look at this plant that hasn't been grazed in that big massive root system under there. That's healthy, it's vigorous, it's wonderful. Look at this continuously grazed pasture and how weak and pathetic the root system is. And then they leave. To me, the 2 pictures in the middle, the 2 plants in the middle, are the far more interesting ones than the ones out on the end. Because what this trial actually was, it was a simulation of different grazing systems. That was set stocking. This was graze off 2/3 of the material, actually clip it off, remove 2/3 of the above ground biomass. This was remove 50%. You know what we're looking at? The fear of wasting grass. If you look at those color photographs, that I just had, this is a depiction of what's going on below ground. If you stay there and let the animals take the next bite, this is what you get. If you let them take just the 1 bite, move them away, we have a much deeper, more vigorous root system. This pasture is growing way more organic matter than this one is. This plant has the capacity to take up water from deep in the soil profile. This one does not. This one extracts minerals from a much broader part of the soil profile than does this one. You know what? You could make exactly the same investment in stock water development, in subdivision fencing, go out every day, move your temporary fences, and you can get this result or you can get that result. If you don't understand the plant-animal-soil relationship, you get this result when you could have gotten this. Now, if you go from here to there, that's an improvement. You'll probably get, the Provincial Environmental Stewardship Award. You'll get invited to go speak at things like this. You'll be on the cover of, the Saskatchewan Angus Journal or something. Yeah, what a hero. You know what? I'd sure rather have this one than that. With no more investment or effort, you can create pastures that are like this rather than that one. It's understanding the difference. This is a similar thing. Just what this basically shows, all these numbers in here, this is the percent of roots not growing a week after a harvest event. So in this trial, every time the plants grew to a certain point, they removed either 10, 20, 30, all the way up to 90% of the leaf area. And what it basically says is you can go to 40 to 50% utilization, have minimal effect on the root system. As soon as you go beyond 50%, then we really start damaging the root system. That was 1955, and now we've gone to 1937. You can see why I quit academia and research, because all the good stuff had already been done. Pretty well everything we needed to know about grazing was already done. Okay, so this one here, the ground, poor pasture, fair pasture, excellent, 50% ground cover. Now that's the combination of green living material and dead litter on the surface. So 50% of this pasture is just bare dirt. This was an abusive grazing situation. This was continuously grazed at twice the recommended stocking rate. This was continuous grazing at the recommended stocking rate. This was rotational grazing. This was a mixed cool season, warm season native plant community. They clipped it down to 2 inches before they put the water on, raked off all of the clippings, so it's just the stubble out there, and still 95% of the ground was covered because it had had good grazing management on it for a year. This one, 3/4 of the water, they put on 3 inches of water in 90 minutes through a sprinkler. 3/4 of the water, 2¼ inches, just ran off down the field. Only 3/4 of an inch actually got into the soil. This one, about half ran off, half got into the soil. This one, 85 to 90% infiltrated into the soil, only about 12% runoff. So how we choose to manage our surface vegetation has tremendous bearing on the water cycle, the regrowth potential, the whole dynamic of the plant and soil community. Rainfall simulator demonstration, I'm not going to go through that. I'm probably getting a little tight on time. Getting close. Where are we? 5 minutes. Holy cow. Thank God I've gotten through the good stuff. All right. Main thing is we want to avoid grazing pastures down to this point here because they just take too long to recover, and we have too much solar energy hitting bare ground, and that's a missed opportunity for production. Intake. 3 controlling factors on grazing intake. The amount of time the animals spend grazing, the biting rate, that is how many bites do they take in a minute, in an hour, in a day, and the bite size. The only one of these that we can really control is the size of the bite. And we do that by controlling the amount of forage left in front of the animals. With beef cattle, grazing intake is going to be maximized when the pasture is somewhere between 6 and 15 inches high. There's no real reason to let it get taller than that, and there's no reason to graze it any shorter than, that 6 inches basically. This is where you're going to get good animal performance if you graze at that level. Now, almost everybody in this room, I'm pretty sure, can look at a pasture that hasn't had the cattle put in it yet, look at it and say, man, that's good pasture. They'll do fine in here. It's going to be great. Only 23 in work we did in Missouri again, only 23% in the variation in grazing intake across a wide range of settings that we looked at. Only 23% of the variation in intake was explained by what the condition of the pasture was before the animals went in. The one that we're so good at putting them in at the right time. 82% of the variation is explained by when you take them out of the pasture. This is the point that most of your neighbors fail to realize that they should have gotten the cattle out of there a long time ago. Because that is what really drives down intake and depresses performance. If you want to change your stockers from gaining 1.5 pounds a day to 2 pounds a day, the fastest way to do that is just waste grass. Tough to swallow, isn't it? Now, you don't have to waste the whole pasture, but leave a little more out there and their performance will go up. It's when we ask them to eat the bottom part of what they've already bitten off, that's when performance collapses. And then the last one here is balancing rest and use. Almost every grassland in the world evolved in conjunction with large grazing animals. For grasslands to truly be healthy and diverse and a living soil under them, they have to be grazed. Just fencing off an area and totally excluding grazing animals from it is the fastest way there is to actually degrade a grassland. But they also need to have recovery time to restore the carbohydrate storage, to develop the root system back, in some cases, like with our legumes, for them to naturally reseed. So I'm going to go through a little series of slides now that I hope kind of ties these things together. And as we go through it, you'll notice from the words that this wasn't written last week. Well, that's what we expect the recovery period to do. Okay. Animals delight most to feed on fresh plants. Cattle supplied with this kind of food would be quickly fatted. If a farmer divided his land into 15 to 20 equal divisions, stopped his beasts from roaming indiscriminately, put the whole number of his beasts into one of these divisions, and have the number of beasts so great as to consume the best part of the grass in one day, give them a fresh part every morning to repeat the same repast, and have so many parks as days required to advance the grass to the proper length after being eaten fair down. So the first field would be ready to receive them after going over all the others, so they might be carried round in a constant rotation. Like I said, that wasn't written last week, was it? But he covered stocking rate, stock density, residual, intake, and balancing use and recovery. James Anderson wrote that in Scotland in 1777. I didn't tell you one thing new that we as an industry and a people haven't known for 200 plus years. Why are we slow to change? Why haven't we done things like this that make so much sense just as routine? Why isn't this the tradition? Why isn't this the conventional production system? I'll let you ponder that one, and we can talk about it over lunch. All right, thank you.